Is China recovering from the coronavirus? China wants to buy foreign companies at a discount during the recession. And could China's coronavirus surveillance come to the U.S.? This is China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. So, the Chinese Communist Party has been saying for a while now that it no longer has a coronavirus problem. China still has a CCP virus problem, though. But we've now seen a clear sign that the Chinese leadership thinks they've got the coronavirus under control. The party announced it will hold the 2 sessions, the biggest political meeting of the year, in late May. That's big. The meetings were originally set for March, but the Communist Party postponed them because they didn't want top officials getting the coronavirus. In fact, according to a leaked internal memo, the whole reason for the coronavirus cover-up was because social stability were key priorities during the long lead-up to China's 2 biggest political meetings of the year in March. So the CCP covered up the coronavirus so they could hold the meetings, and then their cover-up caused them not to be able to hold the meetings. This is called maintaining stability with Chinese characteristics. But on the plus side, schools in China are reopening, and kids are turning up with social distancing hats. Aren't they cute? They're actually in the style of Song Dynasty hats. I can't wait to see that on the New York subway. But it is New York, so no one will bat an eye. The Communist Party has been ramping up surveillance in China. Dissident artist Ai Weiwei says the coronavirus has only strengthened China's police state. And that includes installing surveillance cameras outside people's front doors, and in some cases, even inside their homes. So how many cameras are there inside China? Well, according to this report, as of 2018, China already had close to 350 million surveillance cameras. And remember, they've been installing a lot more since the coronavirus outbreak. So there's a lot of cameras in China. The good news is they're made in China. In the past, being under virtual house arrest was only experienced by Chinese dissidents. But thanks to the coronavirus lockdown, everyone in China has gotten to experience the pleasure of worrying about everything they say and do inside their own house, while also locked in their house. I like to call it the 1984 staycation. But in tough times, heroes will emerge. Like this guy, who was so furious about being under surveillance that after his quarantine ended, he took out a hammer and smashed the device in front of the community workers. Truly an act of courage. But even if you smash the cameras, you're still being watched on the internet. The Communist Party is trying to scrub out the online history of the coronavirus outbreak. And that's why Chinese internet users trying to preserve information about the pandemic that was censored online have been arrested. Reminds me of Dr. Li Wenliang. He tried to sound the alarm about the coronavirus way back in December, but authorities detained him for spreading rumors. He later died of the coronavirus. But now, he's being honored with a medal from the Chinese Communist Party Youth League. Yeah, they're attempting to turn him into a martyr for the Communist Party. See, he stood up to local police who were very bad, and it was local officials who blocked the information from getting to the core of the Communist Party that loves the people very much and would never cover up the virus. I mean, except that they did. And coming up after the break, the Chinese regime wants to take advantage of the coronavirus recession to buy up tech companies in the US and Europe. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The CCP virus has spread across the globe, infecting millions of people. And in response, a lot of governments have shut down non-essential businesses. This has put a huge number of Western companies in or close to bankruptcy. But don't worry, there could be an easy solution to this crisis that started in China. Money from China. The Chinese Communist Party may try to use this economic downturn to buy up American and European companies at bargain basement prices. Because when you're drowning, you'll let anyone help you, including the guy who threw you in the water in the first place. A few weeks ago, a Chinese state-backed investment firm called China Reform Holdings tried to take control of a British graphics chip maker called Imagination Technologies. The deal would have gone through, except the UK government stepped in at the last minute to block it on national security concerns. Of course, China Reform Holdings still provides a third of the funding to Canyon Bridge, the private equity firm that owns Imagination Technologies. So, it's not over. But it highlights a larger problem. Companies in the West are vulnerable to hostile Chinese investment, now more than ever. In 2019, Chinese entities invested nearly $13 billion in European Union countries. In 2018, Chinese entities invested about $25 billion in the United States. A lot of it was in the tech industry. And this is not just random Chinese companies investing in whatever they think will be profitable. It's part of the Chinese Communist Party's unified plan to acquire foreign technology. Back in 2015, the Chinese government announced a plan called Made in China 2025. The goal was to become the world's leading manufacturer in 10 high-tech sectors. Those include things like information technology, like what the UK's Imagination Technologies does, as well as biopharmaceuticals, like making drugs and medical devices. Now at first, Chinese state-run media heavily promoted Made in China 2025, with tons of articles and creepy cartoons. What is happening there? Is the world trying to run away? Where is it going? It's very unclear. Anyway, some people in the West saw Made in China 2025 as a security threat. This report says it aims to systematically acquire cutting-edge technology and generate large-scale technology transfer. In the long term, China wants to obtain control over the most profitable segments of global supply chains and production networks. Some Western governments, especially the Trump administration, started to publicly express concern about it. So the Chinese government dropped it. But they didn't actually drop their plan, they just dropped the name Made in China 2025. The policy remains. And now we're halfway to 2025, and we've seen the impact of this plan that shall no longer be named. We've especially noticed it recently with China now being the world's major producer of ventilators and respirators that have been in such short supply. The key danger now is that with US companies feeling the crunch, they're more likely to turn to any investor for money, even investors with ties to the Chinese Communist Party. This report from the Rhodium Group on March 30th says that some Chinese firms are positioned to take advantage of the sharp drop in global company valuations. It makes sense, because after the 2008-09 crisis, Chinese firms ventured out to acquire discounted assets around the globe, especially those with strategic utility. The good news is, some governments are more aware this time.
Fool me once, shame on you. It fooled me, we can't get fooled again.
It seems the Trump administration has adhered to those words of wisdom. In the United States, the government has woken up to the national security implications of losing sensitive capabilities to China. The Committee on Foreign Investment in the United States, CFIUS, now plays a very active role in screening potential takeovers on national security grounds. But despite that, a lot of Chinese investment in the US has continued as Chinese investors shifted some of their venture investments to industries and technologies that aren't drawing as much scrutiny. And the European Union doesn't even have an equivalent of CFIUS. Each country is left to fend for itself, and many of those countries have been stupid. Italy, Greece, Portugal. I'm going to stop there or else this episode will get too long. But I do also have to mention how many European countries are still willing to have Chinese state-connected company Huawei run their 5G networks, despite US warnings over security concerns. The more investment from Chinese companies means more control by the Chinese state. Remember, every major Chinese firm has a Chinese Communist Party secretary. And if a Chinese company has made it really big, that's because it had lots of connections with the party along the way. There's no such thing as a completely private Chinese company. And that's why Western governments would be smart to keep a closer eye on Chinese investment during this crisis, and figure out a way to help their own domestic companies without relying on China. And stay tuned. After the break, we'll look at how the Chinese regime has increased surveillance of its own citizens and whether other countries might try to adopt those methods. Welcome back to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. As if dissidents in China didn't have enough to be worried about, China already had a massive surveillance system. But with the spread of the coronavirus, that system has been pushed into overdrive. Joining me today to discuss this is Greg Barbaccia, an expert in counterintelligence and corporate espionage. He's also a former intelligence sergeant in the U.S. Army. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
So China has a kind of digital Orwellian society that's never been seen before. How has this system been used during the coronavirus outbreak?
So what China's doing and what the CCP is doing is they're expanding this already staggering amount of information they collect on their citizens to levels that are truly Orwellian that you wouldn't even believe were possible before.
Mm-hmm. So how is this kind of tracking different from what the Communist Party was already doing?
So what they were already doing was this kind of blanket surveillance, sucking up everything. They're tracking locations of phones, but now what they're doing is they're analyzing that data in a bit of a different way, kind of seeing who's in what kind of proximity to who else. They're also tracking some things I don't think they've been doing in earnest before, things like temperature readings when people travel. They're looking more closely at where people have traveled. I'm also imagining they're looking at search terms people are using for symptoms of the disease.
Well, so has it been effective at stopping the spread of the coronavirus?
Yeah, so that's a tough one because the Chinese government is arguably the best in modern times at controlling what type of information is coming out of the Great Firewall. So they're saying the numbers are relatively low and they're pretending they're doing a great job of containing it. But a lot of what we are seeing leaking doesn't make sense. You're seeing a lot of cell phone subscriptions disappear seemingly overnight, these leaked pictures of a lot of urns. So the numbers certainly don't jive with what the Communist Party is giving to the world.
Well, so how else might this surveillance system be used by the Communist Party after the coronavirus is over?
Yeah, so one interesting thing they're doing is they're kind of showing their hand a little more. Everybody knows, and their citizens are the same, that they're collecting all the information. But this quarantine is forcing them to act on it a lot faster, which is having them show their hand to their technical capabilities. So a lot of what happens when you do these type of dragnet technical operations is other data that isn't related to COVID gets picked up. So I wouldn't be surprised. A good example would be there's a couple of people who are known for subversive activities against the government, and they've been hanging out in the same place or let's say cohabitating. When that might have not been obvious to the Communist Party before, they're probably going to trip over this type of information and then use it to target people for political means as well.
So why is this so important for the regime?
This is important because the only way they could project their power on the international scene is to show that they are able to maintain security of their population. They are able to make their population happy and manufacture all these goods for the whole world. So when they start losing control of that, it makes them look terrible on the international stage. And it hurts the ability they have to control their population. If the citizenry starts to doubt the Chinese Communist Party's ability to protect them, all of a sudden they're going to start thinking, why are we risking so much and working so hard for this? What we're seeing that is especially interested is the medical and scientific community. When you look at how some of the COVID-19 whistleblowers were discredited and very literally let die, you start realizing that the CCP is not interested in true scientific outcomes. They're only interested in supporting outcomes when they're congruent with the party information lines.
So you think this new surveillance system is really a result of the party being even more worried about maintaining its grip on power?
Absolutely. I think they are getting a little bit desperate. They wouldn't be using things. We're seeing facial recognition being used to track people who aren't wearing masks. Something else is very interesting, reports about integrating the thermal imaging and the facial recognition to kind of see who's got a fever. That's interesting technology. It's commodity technology that exists. But the fact that the CCP is letting it get out to all of their citizens at once that they're using it is interesting. They seem to be panicking a little, and they're willing to let a little bit more of what they have behind the cloak kind of show.
So what ramifications might this have?
I think if there was ever a time for the kind of younger college-educated people to get the wool removed from their eyes and see that this party is only concerned with existing in perpetuity. It doesn't really care about the health of the nation and the citizens. They're watching their friends and family die and not be able to get medical care. I think this is coupled with the protests we've been seeing in Hong Kong and other places. Now's an interesting time that some sort of uprising could take place. China is also not in a position now to squash something like they were during Tiananmen Square, for example. The international community is just not in a place where they would stand for that. So they're losing a lot of their leverage over the population. Most of that leverage is things are great, things are good, we're providing for you, you're working, the party's happy, why rock the boat? That's changing now.
Well, so this whole surveillance system, it's in China. So why should Americans care?
Well, Americans should care for a few reasons. One, it's important to know what is going on in China because the population here, public opinion can inform our leadership's trade and diplomatic opinions and regulations that are being enforced. This would be difficult to implement for a few reasons in the United States, but it is not impossible. Months ago, you would think it would be crazy that the government would shut down all businesses and force us to stay in our homes to a certain extent. So it's a bit of a slippery slope when public health and national security strings could be pulled.
So with some leading experts and even some major Western media praising China's response to the coronavirus, you think it's possible somebody will start suggesting this kind of system in the United States?
I think it's already being suggested in some sort of the news outlets we're seeing, but there's a couple of problems for that. It makes sense because, we can't trust people to socially distance, let's say. And does social distancing work? Sure, anecdotally, yes. It goes to reason that diseases proliferate when there's human contact. So if we lock everybody up, it can't proliferate. It's easy for China to do this because they do not have civil liberties and a constitution to worry about. While the technological capability certainly exists for this type of collection and analysis in the United States, the problem is it's not really legally feasible currently without more emergency edicts, and it's certainly not culturally palatable.
Well, U.S. tech companies say that they can keep user data anonymous. So really, what is the problem with this kind of tracking in the U.S.?
Yeah, it could be done in an academic level for sure. The problem you're going to see, and I've done some of these big data analytical problem sets before, where this is most important is in these large, dense cities, the New York City, Los Angeles, things like that. New York City is a great example. That's the epicenter of this right now. New York City is very dense, but it's also a very vertically dense city. So when you're doing this type of analysis, and I'm assuming we're talking about getting terrestrial analysis, somehow compelling a telecom company to share this with the government. It's hard to do that type of geoanalysis because when you're looking at a flat Earth from the top down, you and I may look like we're right next to each other, but in reality, you're on floor 57 of the high rise and I'm in the basement. So there's a lot more nuance to how this would be carried out in real life.
What about the fact that Chinese drone companies like DJI are giving drones to the U.S. to help enforce these social distancing measures?
We should be very concerned about everything DJI. I have worked at places in the past where counter intel for the company was under my purview, and we put out blanket, you are not to utilize any of technology from DJI. The Internet of Things is a huge vulnerability now. If you walk around your home and see all the devices that are connected to the internet that are sending data, 99.9% of them are coming from China. It's very possible that they've been implemented with some appliance in them that could send data back. Things like your smart home devices, your routers, your modems, even wearable tech. Very scary what they're able to collect.
What would China do with that kind of information?
So if you remember a few years ago, China hacked into the Office of Personnel Management's database that holds United States DoD security clearances. So they have names and addresses and a lot of PII of people who are affiliated with the government. Now they're very lucky that everybody is dispersed and everybody's working from home. So things like for emails, for example, when you transport an email, there's header information that has the IPs that are attached to everywhere the email bounces during its transport from point A to point B. That used to always be coming from the headquarters of the business or your public office where everybody knows. Now, if China has the ability to, let's say, intercept these emails in transit, now all these emails from these people who are working from home are coming from their home routers. So with the IP information, you could geolocate, really, very literally map all the employees of an entity you're targeting, where they live.
Wow. Well, so the coronavirus is a real problem. Where do you draw the line between security and freedom? That age-old argument.
Yeah, so this is a legal discussion, and it's just one of the most American discussions that have been happening in all sorts of ways since the beginning of the country with the Patriot Act and things like that. The security versus civil liberties. The legal argument would have to be made is if Americans could keep it together and stay in their homes, our citizens need to not force the government to have to take this kind of action and declare national states of emergency and martial law and say that by going outside and not social distancing, it's criminal mischief because you're knowingly possibly spreading this disease. So that's what's at stake here.
Well, if the idea is that this is kind of coming no matter what, how can people protect their privacy?
Yep. So using non-attributable devices is great. What you want to make sure for your personal cyber hygiene is very important. Doing things behind a VPN, using encrypted messaging apps. Those are some of the best practices to protect yourself.
Are there any other specific recommendations you would have?
Yep, you got to keep yourself updated. Make sure you've got the most current versions of all the software you're on. And every now and then, hit a search engine and look at the type of router or modem you're using and see what vulnerabilities exist and if you need to patch them.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. What a pleasure.
Great. And thank you for watching. I'm Chris Chappell, and that's it for this week's China Uncensored.